The subpoena is ridiculous. I have been the most transparent president and administration in the history of our country by far. We just went through the Mueller witch hunt where you had really 18 angry Democrats that hate President Trump. They hate him with a passion. They were contributors in many cases to Hillary Clinton. Hate him with a passion. How they picked this panel, I don't know. And they came up with no collusion, and they actually also came up with no obstruction. But our Attorney General ruled, based on the information, there was no obstruction. So you have no collusion, no obstruction. Now we're finished with it, and I thought after 2 years, we'd be finished with it. No, now the House goes and starts subpoenaing. They want to know every deal I've ever done. Now, Mueller, I assume, for $35 million, checked my taxes, checked my financials, which are great, by the way. You know they're great. All you have to do is go look at the records. They're all over the place. But they checked my financials and they checked my taxes, I assume. It was the most thorough investigation probably in the history of our country. I think I read where they interviewed 500 people. I say it's enough. Get back to infrastructure, get back to cutting taxes, get back to lowering drug prices. That's what, that's what we should be doing. But we're fighting all the subpoenas. Look, these aren't like impartial people. The Democrats are trying to win 2020. They're not going to win with the people that I see, and they're not going to win against me. The only way they can maybe luck out, and I don't think that's going to happen. It might make it even the opposite. That's what a lot of people are saying. The only way they can luck out is by constantly going after me on nonsense.
Hey, with us now, let's bring in a member of the Judiciary Committee, Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He's the author of the new book entitled Our Lost Declaration, America's Fight Against Tyranny from King George to the Deep State. Senator, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's talk, first of all, about news of the day, actually, as it relates to your book. Obviously, you and I have both been, for good reasons, because we served in the legislative branch of government, but we're both Article 1 guys and have been concerned about the imperial presidency, concerned about President Obama's flurry of executive orders. And I've been concerned, and I believe you too were concerned about the president declaring emergency powers. Now we hear that, as Obama and Bush and other presidents have done in the past, we hear this morning the president's not going to comply with subpoenas. How do we balance out the power of the legislative branch and the power of the executive branch, which has just been growing and growing and growing over the past 40, 50 years?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say it's not only the last 40 or 50 years. I would say it's more been over the last 70 or 80 years when the power of the executive branch has grown. The interesting thing is, Joe, I think the legislative branch is almost entirely to blame. That's one of the points I make in my book. One of the reasons I wrote Our Lost Declaration is because I believe that the legislative branch, in order to make it easier for individual members of Congress to avoid criticism, has systematically outsourced its authority. The National Emergencies Act is a great example of that. Decades ago, we gave this vast power to the executive branch, and then we cry about it when it gets used. But the fact is, that is, in fact, legislative power, and it's exercised within the executive branch only because we made it easy to do so. We authorized executives within our system to do that. That's wrong.
But let's talk about the news of the day, which is, of course, the President of the United States telling Bob Costa of the Washington Post that he's going to ignore subpoenas from the Oversight Committee. Republicans would say, well, Barack Obama and Eric Holder did that starting in 2011 on Fast and Furious. How in the world do you have either a Republican or a Democratic Oversight Committee ever having the power to adequately oversee an administration if it's the Attorney General who decides whether those contempt orders can be enforced or not?
This is one of the prerogatives of the executive branch. You're right. This has been litigated both figuratively and literally over the course of many decades with Republican and Democratic administrations against Republican and Democratic Congresses. It is one of the prerogatives of the executive branch that only the executive branch has the prosecutorial power, and as part of that, you do have to have an Attorney General or Justice Department willing to bring an action to support a subpoena. This one isn't
Senator,
easy to solve.
They never will, though.
Right. Typically, they don't.
Just like Attorney General Barr is no more likely to find Donald Trump in contempt of Congress than Eric Holder would have found Barack Obama in contempt of Congress. So, taking a step back, should we possibly look at selecting attorney generals like we select FBI directors, somebody that maybe serves for 10 years?
I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is I tend to believe that we're better off when someone stands in that position, along with most, perhaps all executive branch positions. Those people need to stand accountable to the president at any moment, whether that's a Republican or a Democrat or something else. There is value in having political accountability and having the Attorney General of the United States, for example, be nominated by the president and serve at the pleasure of the president. That provides political accountability to the president.
But do you think that's being provided right now with Attorney General Barr?
Well, I think it is provided in the sense that when a president's Attorney General decides to take or not take a particular action, that's answerable ultimately to the president. And
let's talk about. Did you agree with Attorney General Barr's decisions last week as it pertained to the Mueller report, as it pertained to him drawing conclusions, and the way that he released the Mueller report, the way he summarized the Mueller report, the way that many people believed he was acting more on behalf of Donald Trump than the American people?
Yeah, I don't agree with that latter conclusion. I think he responded in a professional manner. I think he did his job. I don't think he was acting pursuant to political pressure. I think he was doing what he believed was the right thing to do under the law. And look, 2 years have been spent on this investigation. At the end of the day, they found no evidence, not even a scintilla of evidence, to support the collusion theory. And ultimately, there was a decision made that there was no reason, no basis upon which to proceed with a criminal prosecution of the president. I think he properly concluded that the solution here, any further action to be taken on this, is a political decision, one to be made within Congress. I don't question that, and I support him wholeheartedly.
So, Senator, you're right. In Volume 1 of the Mueller report, the special counsel could not establish a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, but it made very clear over those 450 pages a systemic Russian effort to interfere in the 2016 election, echoing what our intelligence agency have said before. There's a story this morning that just crossed in the New York Times that Kirstjen Nielsen, the former Homeland Security Secretary, wanted to approach the president and raise her concern about continued Russian interference in our election process, and was told by the White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney not to raise that with the president because any talk about that was somehow an argument for delegitimizing the president's election. Are you concerned by the fact that the president's view of his election in 2016 is somehow suppressing the awareness and the reaction to the threat of Russian interference in our elections?
I haven't read that story yet, so I can't say this with confidence, but it doesn't sound to me like that's necessarily what that was saying. It sounds like a decision was made by the White House Chief of Staff about what should and shouldn't be brought directly to the president rather than through the Chief of Staff.
But do you think the president shows enough concern, even privately, when you talk to him about the Russian threat? Because we've said you can say it once if you're the president of the United States. Yes, there's Russian interference. I accept that, and we have to do more about it. But no, I had nothing to do with it. Why can't he say the first part of that statement?
Well, I don't think he disputes the fact that it happened. I don't think any of us deny the fact that there was excessive Russian interference. I look back at the 2012 presidential campaign, where I remember when my now colleague Mitt Romney, then a presidential candidate, warned about Russia, warned that we should be more concerned about Russia than we were at the time. I wish those warnings had not gone unheeded by President Obama. I wish that the early warnings detected by the Obama administration itself in the 2016 election cycle, I wish that had resulted in more action on their part to make sure that this
But
didn't happen.
you saw last summer, Senator, the President of the United States standing on a stage in Helsinki with President Putin of Russia and saying, I don't know why he would do it, pouring cold water on the idea that Vladimir Putin had interfered. So again, do you think the President is concerned enough about a continuing threat from Russia into our election process?
I think he is concerned. I think he will continue to be concerned. This isn't something we can tolerate. I also think it's important to remember that there is no evidence of collusion and that there is no evidence that the efforts by the Russian government had any effect, had any impact on the ultimate outcome of this election.
Senator, Rudy Giuliani was on with Chuck Todd over the weekend talking about Russian interference. And there's no question that the Trump campaign used information that the Russians hacked in order to influence our election. Giuliani said that was totally fine, A-OK. Is it okay with you?
You know, if I were in their position, I would like to think that I wouldn't be inclined to use that. I've never been a presidential campaign manager. I've never been a presidential candidate, don't intend ever to be. And so it's difficult for me to say for sure whether I would do that. My instinct is
would
that
you use it in the Senate campaign?
I don't think so. I think if somebody came to me under those circumstances, I'd be inclined to report them to the appropriate government authorities and to deal with them at arm's length at best through our own government. But like I say, I've never been in that position. I hope never to be.
Hey, Senator, I just want to ask you a little bit about the other part of the report and the part that is now more of a live issue, which is the question of obstruction of justice. I know you've said that as to obstruction, I'm reading a quote of yours here, they were unable, meaning the Mueller's investigators were unable to come up with a case against the president that could survive in court. But as you point out, this is not really a legal issue. We don't think we can indict a sitting president, so the question now is a political one. The report has 10 instances that for many people, they read them and say, I don't know what the legal standard is here, but that sure looks like obstruction of justice to me, including the president asking his counsel to fire Bob Mueller, then asking him to lie about his request that he fire Bob Mueller, asking people to falsify notes to file to suggest that he did not ask to have Bob Mueller fired. Those things to a common sense voter look an awful lot like you're obstructing something. So I want to just understand how it is that you don't think that those things are, if not meeting the legal standard, why those are not troubling and why those don't suggest that the president was inappropriately abusing his power.
First of all, we are talking about inchoate acts. We're talking about things that were never carried through all the way to completion. Secondly, this is a political question and not one that can be brought forward in court, and therefore, by its very nature, it's up to the House of Representatives to decide whether it wants to do anything about this. Number three, I think it's important to remember that it tends to be a political mistake for the party not occupying the White House to go after the occupant of the White House, especially within a year and a half of a presidential election campaign. If they want to do that, that's their prerogative.
Can I just ask you this question? I'm trying to ask you that you're now doing political analysis. I'm trying to ask you this question. The sitting president of the United States, a member of your party, went to his counsel and tried to order that the man who was investigating him be fired. That counsel, Don McGahn, stood up and said, I'm not going to do that. The president then asked him to lie about it, both publicly and then lie about it in documents that he would put in the files. Does that not strike you personally as obstruction of justice, or at least as something that is extraordinarily troubling?
It certainly strikes me as something that's unflattering. And if you conduct an investigation like this over the course of 2 years, you're going to find some things that are unflattering. This is unflattering. I don't think anyone disputes that.
So, Senator, we thank you for coming and answering our questions. Let's talk about your book, our lost declaration. If you said you've never run for president, never worked on a presidential campaign. Let's just say, though, let's say you were president. Talk about what you would do to help enact some of the things that you write about in our lost declaration.
I'd worked tirelessly to reinvigorate Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which ties directly into our Declaration of Independence and why I wrote our lost declaration. We have seen over the last 80 years a profound shift of power from the people's elected lawmakers in Washington over to the executive branch. One of the things that we pushed back against at the time of the American Revolution, one of the reasons why we no longer fly the Union Jack or sing God Save the Queen, has to do with not just with the idea of getting rid of a monarchy, but it has to do with the inherent dignity of the immortal human soul. Some of that dignity is degraded when the government starts to act not as if the government's there to serve the people, but the other way around. And so I reinvigorate this notion that the laws are supposed to be made by Congress. The most dangerous branch of government is supposed to be Congress. It is Congress that is most accountable to the people at regular intervals. The entire House of Representatives is up for re-election every 2 years, and 1/3 of the Senate is up every 2 years. That's the reason why we should only entrust that most dangerous of government powers with the most dangerous branch.
So, Senator, there's been actually this tension from the start. Even anybody that's ever read the Federalist Papers understands that the battle has been raging since Hamilton and Madison worked together to draw up those papers. It seems right now, though, that Hamilton is having his day, that the Hamilton side of the argument is prevailing over Madison's.
Yes, that is right, and I would take it even a step further and say it's not just the Hamilton side that's prevailing, and that there's been more of a concentration of power at the federal level, but also that the King George III model is prevailing. And I'm not talking just about this administration. In fact, I'm talking about basically every Republican and Democratic administration over the last 80 years under Houses of Representatives, Senates, and White Houses of every conceivable partisan combination, who have systematically handed over these vast powers to the executive branch. You look at war power, you look at lawmaking power, the regulatory system, the intelligence gathering apparatus, law enforcement agencies, and all kinds of agencies that are told, in effect, go and make good law. This is exactly the type of government that we fought back against at the time of revolution. The difference now is that instead of having a single figurehead, King George III at the time of the revolution, we have tens of thousands of executive branch bureaucrats who are nameless and faceless as far as the American people go, but like the king, cannot be removed. That's troubling. It ought to concern all of us, and it's the focus of my book.
All right, Senator, and that book is Our Lost Declaration, America's Fight Against Tyranny, from King George to the Deep State. It's available now. Senator Michael Lee, thanks again. We appreciate you being with us. And coming up next, White House senior advisor Jared Kushner tries to dismiss election interference as a couple of Facebook ads. A couple seems by many to be quite an understatement. We're going to be breaking it all down for you straight ahead on Morning Joe. We're back in 2 minutes.